Hey, welcome everybody. How many of you have heard the term singularity before? The announcer just mentioned that. How many of you have a clear idea of what it is? So that's some of you, at least. Now, I don't really have a clear idea of what it is myself, because I don't think that the idea is clear. But we'll pick it apart a little bit today and maybe gain some insight into that. So there are a number of different ideas that have been associated with this label, this singularity. So it has a perfectly well-defined meaning in mathematics and in physics, but that's not the sense of this word that we're interested in today. The singularity is when the click-through rate goes to 0 and the amount of ads goes to infinity is one definition. Or when all of humanity begins to think as if it were one single nerve cell. That's one of my favorite definitions. It's usually associated with this idea of exponential progress, Moore's law, an event horizon, the idea that we will somehow merge with our computers. Out of all of these ideas, the maybe most interesting one is this idea of exponential growth. Now, of course, Moore's law, which you all know, pertains to the rate of growth in computing power, which is doubling at a quick pace, and you've all heard about that. There's a more interesting exponential growth of the world economy as a whole, which is also doubling, and that's more interesting because it's always possible to find at any given point in time a particular field where things are happening very quickly. So in the last several decades, the semiconductor industry has been such a field, but the world economy as a whole kind of aggregates over different areas of growth, including ones that grow much more slowly, like airplane engines. But that is still exponential, as this graph shows, albeit with a much slower doubling time. And if one zooms out over a longer time frame, like this, the last 1,000 years, it does look like a spike, or the last 1,000,000 years. It really shows that we're living in an anomalous era right now. But none of that is what I want to talk about today. Instead, I want to zoom in on one particular sense of this word, the singularity, which is the idea that human intelligence will one day no longer be the smartest form of intelligence around. The idea of the singularity as the possibility of an intelligence explosion. So this is quite independent of all the other things, whether progress is exponential or linear or polynomial or any other thing, whether there is an event horizon beyond which we cannot predict the future. All of these are completely separate issues to this question, which is whether human intelligence will be displaced as the apex of intelligence on Earth. So let's focus on that for the rest of this discussion. One possible path towards this would be through genetic enhancement. Where you could imagine forms of genetic selection, which over time could make it feasible to create biological intelligence that exceeds what current human intelligence is. I think that that's clearly possible, although a slow process. And I think that what we will ultimately see instead is forms of machine intelligence that surpasses human intelligence, and that's where the long-term action is. Machine intelligence has various fundamental advantages over biological intelligence. One such advantage is the fundamental physical limits to information processing, which makes it possible to build much faster hardware than the biological wetware that we use for thinking with. So transistors can just process information much faster than biological neurons can. And we already have quite powerful hardware, and it's getting faster all the time. That seems to be on track to rivaling and exceeding the biological computational power of the brain. The big open question is rather the software part. And here one can distinguish a range of different possible avenues that all lead to the same destination, meaning human level or greater than human level general intelligence, but through different avenues. So one is by reverse engineering the human nervous system. We already have one example of a system that achieves human-level intelligence, which is the human brain. It's a finite physical system. We can try to figure that out. at one extreme of granularity, we have the idea of whole brain emulation, where you would literally scan a particular nervous system and then implement the same computation on a faster substrate, such as in a computer machine. There are various precursor technologies that are needed for this, none of which is currently in place. You would need very powerful, high-throughput scanning technology to do that, to actually scan a human brain at a sufficient level of detail. We have microscopes that can see the right kind of detail, but you can only scan with that resolution currently at a very slow rate. With electron microscopes, you can scan at a fairly fast rate, but still not fast enough. So you need some progress in high-throughput scanning technology to be able to image a system as large as the human brain at the right level of detail, where you can see individual synapses and detect the synaptic strength of connection between different neurons. Another technology that you would need is the ability to interpret these scanning data through automated image recognition system and then neurocomputational models to know what each of these things you see in your scan is doing in the brain, what each kind of nerve cell is actually computing, the type of functionality it has. And there is quite good progress. We do have already pretty good neurocomputational models of many individual nerve cell types. But still, there is a lot more that needs to be done there. And finally, you need enough hardware power to actually run this kind of massive simulation. It's not clear we quite have enough hardware capacity to do this yet, but that looks to be broadly on track. Now, depending on which of these technologies turn out to be the last one to arrive, you get different scenarios. If either the amount of computational hardware that is available is a constraining factor, or the scanning technology is a constraining factor, then you would probably have a fairly predictable rate of progress, where you could see, you would first be able to maybe simulate an insect brain and then a larger brain, and you could sort of see that the human level was coming down the road. If, on the other hand, the second factor, that is the modeling part, was the last component to arrive, then you might have a sudden breakthrough. You have a hardware overhang. You have more than enough hardware, and you might have all the scanning data already there. You're just not sure exactly how to run this kind of simulation because you're lacking some key insight into the neurophysiology of these nerve cells. Then, as soon as that last modeling insight arrives, you might then suddenly be able to create human-level brain emulations before you've had many years of experience with smaller animal brain emulations. Like right now, we can't do even a small animal. We can't even do C. elegans, which is a little nematode worm with 302 neurons. We have it all mapped out. We know what all of these 302 neurons are, but we don't know the sign of the. We don't know which neurons are exciting which neurons or which one are inhibitory neurons. So at the moment, we are basically at sort of level 0. So that's all for one path towards general artificial human-level intelligence. Like another is to forget about all this neurobiological mess and take a more theoretical and mathematical approach to this. The field of artificial intelligence as traditionally conceived. That has seen quite a lot of progress over the last several decades, not as rapid progress as some of the early practitioners had anticipated. There have been various predictions that we would have artificial intelligence that could pass the Turing test by now at various states. That has obviously not come to pass. Nevertheless, over just, say, half a century or so since we've started doing this kind of thing, there has been a lot of impressive progress in game playing AI, for example. You all know like chess-playing computers that are currently beating the best human chess players, but in many other fields as well, backgammon, checkers. Go has so far eluded chess-playing game AI computers, but rapid progress is made in this game as well, and it's probably on track to beating the best Asian human Go champions in maybe 10 years from now or so. 2 years ago, there was this IBM's Watson machine, the trivia quiz system that you've probably heard about, which beat the human champions in these kind of trivia challenges. In many other application areas as well. So game AI is just one, but AI is actually in use behind the scenes in a large number of different domains today. We tend not to think about it as AI as soon as it starts working. It just becomes kind of boring algorithms and software. But these were, once upon a time, cutting-edge research areas that have advanced far enough that they're actually useful. And I don't know if you can read this. It's quite small there on the screen. Algorithmic trading, route finding software, medical support system, industrial robotics, speech recognition, face recognition, recommendation systems, machine translation, face recognition, search engines, like Google is the world's biggest AI system today. We don't think of it as an AI, but it's really what it is, the search engine. Equation solving and theory improving software, logistics planning, airline reservations, spam filters, credit card fraud detection. All of these things are happening in the background, and progress is being made on a wide range of areas here. So is it likely that either the whole brain emulation approach or this more mathematical, theoretical AI approach will eventually result in human-level machine intelligence? Well, it certainly is a physically possible technology, and there are these different avenues that we can see incremental progress happening along, and that should eventually get there. So assuming that scientific and technological progress continues, then eventually, sure, it must be possible to engineer these kinds of systems. If one thinks abstractly of a kind of two-dimensional space where we plot some general sense of technological capability measure on one axis and time on the other, that what we think of as the human condition must be thought of as a very narrow band within this. Out of all possible levels of capability that a species, a technological species could have, the modern technological state is a very narrow range there in that. Like if we have too little capability, ability to sustain too few individuals, we would go extinct. And if we have more capability, we might be able to reach a more technologically mature state where we can colonize space, have superintelligence, and all these other things. And in between, there is the current human condition, which we think of as normal and permanent, but it's really a huge anomaly in historical time frames, and it's not going to last forever. So in that abstract sense, sure, it should happen one day. But what about when? And the answer to that is that nobody knows. We did an opinion survey last year. We had a conference that we organized in Oxford with some of the world's leading experts in the field of artificial general intelligence. And for what it's worth, the median opinion there was that there was a 50% chance of human-level AI by mid-century, but with a wide kind of interval around that. So the 90% confidence interval was up at 2150, and some 10% chance that it will happen much sooner, but roughly 50% chance by mid-century. Now, this is a very small sample, and also the people in this field might have a tendency to be over-optimistic. Like, if you didn't think it was possible, why would you devote your life to the field of artificial general intelligence? We are currently running some bigger opinion survey to poll a wider range of researchers in machine learning and robotics and relevant fields. But the bottom line there is that we don't know when. We should therefore, I think in terms of a very, rather than the point prediction, think in terms of a probability distribution, and a very smeared out probability distribution at that. So some probability it could happen surprisingly soon, within a couple of decades, some probability mid-century, some probability later this century, and maybe some chance that will never happen, that we will ruin our civilization through some other means before we get to this. So far about the question of whether we could have machine intelligence rivaling and then exceeding human intelligence. Now, there is a separate question here which we can distinguish from the first one. So the first is like, how long will it take till this time? I said we don't know, but we should assign some probability to a wide range of outcomes. The second question is, if and when we do reach this point where we have human-level machine intelligence, how long will it take from that point onwards until we have radically superhuman machine intelligence? This is a separate question. You might be very pessimistic in terms of how long it will take to get to human-level intelligence, but you might still think that if and when that ever happens, it will be very quick till we get to superhuman intelligence. That's a consistent view to have. So let's, for the next few minutes, focus on this other question, the steepness of the takeoff, if you want. Like, what happens after you reach human-level machine intelligence? And you can distinguish different kinds of scenario here. You could have like a slow takeoff, where it would take maybe decades or centuries after you get to human-level machine intelligence until you get something radically superhuman. A fast takeoff, where this would happen in maybe minutes, hours, or days, and then like intermediary possibilities. The singularity hypothesis is often associated with the idea that the takeoff will be slow, or intermediate at least, that it will not take decades or centuries after we reach human-level intelligence till we get superintelligence, but rather that it will happen quite quickly. The hard thing is to get from here to human-level intelligence. Maybe that will take many, many decades or longer, but once we get there, it might be a very explosive growth from there on. So how can one think about this? Well, if you have some system that has reached human-level intelligence, it might then improve its intelligence further, and what determines the rate at which it would gain further intelligence? So you could sort of divide that schematically into two factors. On the one hand, it depends on how much optimization power is being applied to improve the system. And on the other hand, how hard is it to improve the system? Let's call the latter factor the recalcitrance of the system. How hard is it to improve? And so the rate of improvement would be a function of these two factors, how much effort is going into improving it and how hard it is to improve. So those will determine the rate of increase. Now we can think of each of these factors separately. So let's look first at optimization power. So there's some system, an AI, let us say, and it's being improved by the product that is building the system, the programmers that are working on refining it. And there's also some optimization power coming from the rest of the world. Let's say that the world in general is producing better computers, and then the product might use these faster computers to run the system. So there's some general contribution just from advances in computer science and neuroscience or hardware that also flows in to improving the system. So this is the way that AI systems look today. There is some amount of optimization power coming from the programmers and from the wider environment. Now, when the system becomes sufficiently intelligent, say as intelligent as a human programmer, it can start to contribute optimization power itself. It can apply its own intelligence to improving itself. And the magnitude of that contribution coming from the system itself will grow as the system becomes more intelligent. And so at some point, the amount of optimization power from the system itself will start to exceed the amount of optimization power coming from the outside world in this scenario. And we can call that the crossover point. So up until then, optimization power might be roughly constant, although maybe people start to work harder on the system when it gets closer to succeeding or when it starts doing something useful. But after that crossover point, you get this additional feedback loop, which can greatly increase the explosivity of that phase of the takeoff. Another factor is the recalcitrant. How hard is it to improve the system? So even if you had a lot more optimization power going into the system, you might still not see very rapid progress if you had a situation where, say, the low-hanging fruits were first plucked, and then it got harder and harder to find subsequent improvements. Then you might spend an increasing amount of resources for a decreasing yield of progress. Now, it's a big question, which we won't have time to go into in detail, is how does the recalcitrance look like for improving a machine intelligence in this region where it's roughly human-level intelligent? But a couple of observations suggest that the recalcitrance might not be high at all. It might, in fact, be quite low. So one is that once you have a human-level intelligence, you could at least get speed superintelligence just by running it faster. And we know that it's quite easy to improve hardware. We have this exponential increase in hardware capability, which we've seen for a long time. So even just that, without any further improvements in software, would result in a kind of speed superintelligence just by sort of allowing the same system to run on faster hardware. You could have a human-level intelligence that is 1,000 times faster than a human, or than 1,000,000 times faster. But there are probably also improvements in software that you could run that would boost this even further and limit the recalcitrance. And we tend to think of the human range of intelligence as spanning this like Einstein at the top as this giant genius, and then sort of the dumbest person we think of, the village idiot at the bottom, and that's a huge distance there. But I think a more accurate picture would be to think that we have sort of the 0 point being current AI systems, and then somewhere high up here we have like a mouse, which is far more intelligent than in some kind of general intelligence sense than anything we have today, and then a chimp, and then maybe a village idiot, which is a little bit more intelligent than a chimp, and then Einstein maybe just slightly more intelligent than a village idiot on this scale of absolute intelligence. Like we tend to obviously calibrate what we think of as dumb and stupid to fit the human range. But there is no particular reason to think that it would be much harder to build an artificial Einstein than to build an artificial village idiot. They are all basically running on exactly the same biological neurocomputational machinery. Like they share the same genetics. It's pretty much the same thing with some minor tweaks. So it might be that you will take a long time to get up to mouse, and then a long time to get to chimp, and then a long time to get to village idiot, but then you've just swooshed right by human genius in the next kind of interval, even assuming a kind of constant amount of optimization power going in. I'm going to wrap up. So in conclusion, this concept of the singularity is confusing and confused because there are many completely different ideas that are referred to by this term. I think it's better, therefore, probably not to use the term. Instead, if one is interested in one of these ideas, like in this talk, it's better to use some more specific term, like the intelligence explosion, to refer to this idea of greater than human machine intelligence. That question, in turn, can be divided into two questions. How long does it take to get to human-level machine intelligence? And what happens then? How explosive is the takeoff to superintelligence after that? With regard to the first question, I said we don't know how long it will take. We should spread out our probability distribution over a wide range of possible arrival dates. With regard to the second question, how explosive is the takeoff? I think we have reasonable grounds for thinking that that will probably be quite rapid. It could be explosive. Once we get to human-level intelligence, it might only be a short term after there before we have radical superintelligence. And that then suggests, which I will not be discussing here, but it suggests that it might be very important to think about that kind of dynamics. What happens when you get human-level machine intelligence that then soon after becomes superintelligent? It might become a very important shaper of the future of humanity and of intelligent life. And in fact, I'm working on a book on that right now, but that's a topic for another day. Thanks.
Right, thank you very much. I won't be talking about the singularity, but about the intelligence explosion. Now, you are not an IT professor, you're a philosopher, a professor in philosophy, right?
Yeah. I did physics and computational neuroscience and stuff, and AI in my past, but right now I'm in a philosophy faculty.
Okay, I'm asking you as a philosopher, do you believe that you can digitize empathy or love or compassion, intangible goods like that?
Well, I don't think we can do it today, or that we're anywhere near doing it. I do think that the brain is a physical system, an information processing system, and that if you replicated exactly the same information processes that are naturally occurring in the brain in a computer, although it's a separate question, I think you would then have the same subjective experiences, the same mental life supervening on that computation as we now have supervening in our brain chemistry. And that's not...
Is that a yes or a no?
Well, that's a yes, that it's possible in principle, but not today in practice.
In theory, you think it's possible?
Yeah. So it's probably the majority view among people in computer science and computational neuroscience and philosophy. Although, of course, there are many people who don't think that.
Okay, so we're going to see spiritual machines then?
Unless we destroy ourselves in some other manner or seize technological advancement, then it looks like we will have intelligent machines at some point.
Unless we destroy ourselves, is that what you said?
Yeah, or some other thing puts on hold. So the basic idea is that there are these incremental, we can understand more about how the brain works, we can do more research on AI and mathematics and statistics. All of these things will gradually take us closer to the ability to build machine intelligence. So unless something puts on hold to our advance in all of these different areas, I think we will eventually reach that capability.
Right. And are you an optimist or a pessimist?
Well, I often get asked that question. And it's a little annoying because I think basically optimism and pessimism are both biases. They are sort of distortions, and you should try to avoid both.
Right.
Now, maybe I am one or the other, but if I knew I was one or the other, I would correct for it. So as far as I can see, I'm neither an optimist or a pessimist, but maybe a more objective and informed observer could recognize in me a systematic skew of opinion in one way or the other.
Right. So next time if I ask you if you're an optimist or a pessimist, you say, no, I think like an algorithm. That's more like the...
Well, I think we're all thinking like algorithms,
Yes.
because fundamentally I think we are algorithms implemented in biological substrate for now, but maybe in some different substrate in the future.
Wow, I think we've only started the conversation. If you want to talk more about this subject, then please join this philosophy professor who knows an awful lot about singularity, although he doesn't want to use the term, in the green room where the domes, the igloos are, so you can talk to him in face-to-face. Thank you so much for explaining to us.